Welcome, everybody, to Save Our Shifts, Day Shift, Episode 10. The title today is, What Shrub Got to Do With It? I'm sorry, I maybe said I wouldn't do that beforehand, but I'm obviously a big Tina Turner fan, so I couldn't miss the opportunity for that. So today we're going to be talking about shrubs, or essentially vinegar cordials. But before we get to that, I would like to thank our sponsors for making this possible today. First sponsor for our day shift, episode 10, is Monkey Shoulder Scotch. So this is a pure malt blend from Speyside, produced by William Grant, bottled at 43 ABV. So it's not your grandfather's scotch. It's super smooth, full flavored, but not like aggressively peaty in any way. Just really nice for mixing and blending in cocktails. Has that classic heather honey Speyside profile. Our other sponsor today, one of our Goliath level sponsors, is Hard Shore Gin from right here in Portland, Maine. Hard Shore is been around since 2016. Founder Jordan Milne actually sources the grain for this from a family farm in upstate New York, just outside Syracuse, where he grew up. And then he utilizes a botanical blend of Tuscan juniper, coriander, orris root, mint, and rosemary. Gets a nice complex floral flavor profile from a fairly simple botanical build, bottled at 92 proof for enhanced flavor and enhanced strength. Great in the gin and tonic. They actually released a barrel-aged version in the fall called North Oak. So something to plan for when you're making your shrubs for the fall. My name is Pat McDonald. I'm your host today. I am the USBG Portland Education Director and one of the Save Our Shifts producers. Happily standing in for our regular host, Mark Hibbert. Hey, Mark, hope you're watching. I'd also like to thank our panel today for joining us. First of all, I'd like to introduce Harper Fendler from Portland Hunt and Alpine Club, where he bartends. He's also one of the founders of Trash Bird Co. and Resurgam. Can you tell us a little bit about Trash Bird Co.?
Happily, yeah. So Trash Bird was a project that I started with actually Josh, who we'll get to in a little bit, I'm sure, and another bartender I work with, Sean Connerty. And it was an effort for us to get out and try to do different pop-ups around Portland and southern Maine in general. And what we like to do is we come into different spaces that are either developing a cocktail program or looking to, and we work with them in whatever theme they like. And then we apply our principles, which are anti-waste and efficient use principles. So we go in, talk to folks, see what they want to do, and then we see how we can most efficiently set up a fun night of cocktails, drinks, and a little bit of education as well.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our second panelist today is Travis Gauvin, who's a bartender at Gather in Yarmouth and the Tuscan Bistro in Freeport. Hey, Travis, how you doing?
I'm good, Pat. Thanks for having us. Shout out
Excellent.
to the sponsors, Monkey Shoulder and Hard Shore. This is cool. This is what the world needs right now is, things like this.
So I understand you spent a little time at Hard Shore early on.
Yeah.
You have plenty of great examples.
I was fresh off of, starting to bartend in Portland and in the area. And I was, 3 or 4 years into bartending. And this really weird opportunity came about where it was their opening night. And I bonded with Jordan and we talked about making gin. And I had made gin at a bar at one point. I was infusing juniper berries and a bunch of local herbs and spices to make a gin mix behind the bar. And we hit it off, and yeah, it was incredible. I definitely learned how little I actually know about science with my year there. So you need a lot more chemistry skill than I have.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Our next panelist today, good friend Charlotte Stanton, who's the bar manager of Little Giant in the Portland's West End. So we've not only been neighbors in the West End, Charlotte, but also we worked together in the past at Bow Bow. How have things been going since?
Very good, interesting, just adapting and pivoting like everybody else. But it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Last but not least, we have Josh Lemay. Josh is a bartender at Hunt and Alpine. In addition to founding Trash Bird, he also is going to tell us a little bit about Resurgam.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks to Hardshore and Monkey Shoulder for, giving us some contributions. So Resurgam is a magazine that was started by the three of us that you just heard about who made Trashbird. And we had a bunch of time because no one is doing events right now. And so we wanted to do something that we could sort of give back. And so we've been taking contributions from people over town and writing articles and pictures and all that sort of thing to make a magazine about Portland and the food scene and all of what we may be going through at this time. And then giving whatever money at this point, like while all of this COVID is happening, giving all the money to people who maybe didn't get unemployment or going through hard times on top of whatever else in the restaurant industry that we can sort of just make sure that they're taken care of, So.
I certainly appreciate that. Very common line goals with Save Our Shifts. So thanks for joining us today. We're going to jump right into our topic today. What's Shrub got to do with it? I'm sorry, you only get my Tina Turner voice once. For those of us who are just joining, maybe don't have as much bar experience, we're talking about essentially vinegar cordial called Shrub. Okay, this is very popular type of syrup in colonial America. It actually gets its name from the Arabic word sharab, which means to drink. So typically, this syrup is made by combining fruit, some type of sugar or other sweetener, and vinegar together, essentially creating a maturation process and preserving the fruit over the extended off season, okay, which is I think particularly important when we're talking about the short growing seasons here in Maine. So usually they would be drinking Shrub, with some cool water on a hot summer day. I'm going to be drinking a little Shrub that I made last summer, actually, when I was at Chaval with some Topo Chico. So this Shrub that I have on hand is made with a combination of red fruit, so local strawberries, sour cherries, and red currant. I'm just going to throw a little bit in there. Watch that fizz up. Ooh. Sorry, you can't see the mess I'm making. So we're going to jump right into it and talk about the Shrub making process and kind of how it's relevant to the whole bar, cocktail revolution, if you will. One of the most important steps I think you have to make when deciding how you're going to make your Shrub is whether you're going to do a cooked Shrub or a cold process. And I'm going to direct this first question to Josh. When you're making Shrubs, do you usually cook the fruit or do you follow the cold process? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
So if I'm making a Shrub, it really depends. I would say I would prefer cold only because it's less energy. Back to the whole, sustainability thing. If you're cooking something, you're using power, and so the less that we can use power, the better it is. So, but that means that you're taking, a week or something to infuse your fruit. You're using, you're splitting up the batch, and you're doing that in a very sort of different style. I don't know how many people that are listening have ever sort of tried to make a Shrub, but like if you're doing the hot Shrub, you are sort of boiling the sugar in the vinegar and you're doing all of that. And so you can make a large batch of it. If you're going to infuse it cold or room temperature, you're going to want to probably break it down into smaller batches, which then is like, okay, well, what about my storage while it's sitting here? Like, where am I keeping this? So obviously it depends on like, what's my timeline? Am I doing this? Do I know that I need this in the far future? I can take a little more time. And then if I don't, then let's just, fire up the stove and make it work.
So typically if somebody's at home and they want to make a Shrub, there's a couple of ways they can do it. They can do the heated process or cooking process where essentially they're combining the fruit, sugar, and maybe some water together on the stovetop, making essentially a fruit syrup and then adding vinegar to that. It can happen really quick, but certainly less sustainable. And you also have some alterations to the flavor of the fruit. You know, cooked things versus fresh things are just naturally going to be different. When you're making a cold shrub, I find that you're relying on this slower process of maceration as the catalyst to extract the flavor from the fruit. Sugar and salt, but in this case specifically sugar, has certain qualities, hygroscopic it's called. It helps to create essentially osmosis when you combine it with the fruit, pulling the liquid out of the fruit solids and concentrating by breaking down the cell walls of the fruit itself, the flavor in the leftover fruit. It does take a little longer depending on the fruit that you're using. It can be, 24 hours, but up to maybe a week if you're using like a firmer fruit, something like an apple. And then at some point you have to make a couple important decisions, such as what type of vinegar and when to add it. Do you add it to the fruit solids? But specifically, my next question is about what types of vinegars to use for shrubs. And I'm going to direct this one to Charlotte. Do you use more of like a neutral vinegar for all of your shrubs, or is the fruit kind of driving the consideration for that aspect of the shrub?
I would say the fruit sort of drives that answer. My favorite shrub that I've been making for the past couple of years is a rhubarb shrub that I use an apple cider vinegar. So it's not the same like 1-to-1-to-1 ratio they usually do with vinegar and your fruit or vegetable. And then sugar, it's a little less because it's a strong flavor combination, with rhubarb being kind of like a more neutral flavor. So it's sort of fruit driven, and like, what do you want out of the shrub? Like, what do you want it to taste like? Do you want it to be like acidic and have that brightness of the fruit, or do you want it to be more mellow? What are you using it in for drinks? It's sort of like you have to plan what that looks like in your menu and like what you want it to be in your palate. So
anybody else have some experience with different types of vinegar? Like, I mean, there's so many options out there. From the one that I actually used for this red fruit shrub was champagne vinegar. Just wanted to keep kind of the brightness. But I mean, I've heard of people using balsamic. I've heard of people using red wine.
I found that balsamic vinegar works well with berries, but you don't need, you don't want to use too much though. Apple cider vinegar is what I'm most familiar with. At Gather, we make a switch-o, very traditional recipe with honey as the sweetener, and then ginger, a very ginger-forward flavor, and we make it as a mocktail if you just want to do soda right from our soda water spout, which is delicious and has plenty of electrolytes and a lot of immune system benefits. So that's great for what's going on in the world right now. And then if you want to add vodka in it too, that's also delicious. I actually find, because we keep a bottle of Hardshore on too, it's great with the switchel mix. But apple cider vinegar, I think, is the easiest. It's what most of us have at home too, for like the at-home bartenders or the at-home cooks. I don't know if you've been told this, but apple cider vinegar, is great for like warts, and you take a teaspoon of it. I don't know if anyone ever had a grandmother like tell them to take a teaspoon of that at the start of every day. So I've had the least amount of success with red wine vinegar. I feel like that always imparts too much flavor for me. I don't know if anyone's had that problem too.
Yeah, I've played around a bit with red wine vinegar. I found that it works really well when you use it with another type of vinegar. So I've had success using red wine vinegar and apple cider vinegar, specifically in a strawberry shrub, which is perfect for this time of year right now. And that comes out really nice. The red wine vinegar, it has a strong flavor, but it adds a nice bit of body, a little bit more depth to it as well.
A related question for the panel, in addition to considering your vinegar component, what type of sweeteners are best? Like you mentioned honey, Travis, but I mean, people could be using agave or different types of brown sugars like carbonado or demerara, and like, how do you choose? Yeah. I'm going to put this one to Harper.
Yeah, I think it gets back to what Charlotte said earlier, which is it's really dependent on what you want out of it. So what are you basing your shrub on? Is it going to be, is it all about the fruit, or are you looking to make it more of an entire animal all in of itself? So with like that strawberry shrub I was talking about, I just used neutral cane sugar just because I want the strawberry flavor and I want more of that apple cider and red wine vinegar to come through and brighten it up. But if I'm doing something in the fall, doing something with apples or pears, orchard fruit, I like using brown sugar. You get some of those warmer flavors to go with it. And I actually like using what you mentioned before, a little bit of champagne vinegar as well. I think it really complements some of those orchard notes that you get. So it depends on what you want to go, where you want to go with it, whether you want the fruit to shine more, or you just want something to accent that, or do you want something to complement it more?
Champagne with the orchard fruits makes perfect sense. That should be an easy mix. Yeah.
It's such a fun time. Yeah.
And now usually when I'm making a shrub, I follow a very simple ratio to remember of 1, 1, 1. So equal parts, fruit, sugar, and vinegar when you're doing that maceration process and kind of combining everything together. Do those ratios change, you find, when you're considering other sweetening agents? And you mentioned like using a lesser proportion of red wine vinegar, and kind of cutting that with some other vinegars for your shrubs. And like, how do you know when to use what and how much? Is it like a taste thing that's guiding it?
For me, yeah, definitely taste. And also, just again, thinking about what your base is going to be. So if you're using, really ripe and beautiful, juicy strawberries, if you taste one, you can see how sweet they're going to be. And you can maybe dial that sugar back a little bit because you don't need it as forward. So also thinking about what you want to apply it to. Sometimes you want a brighter, more tart shrub, maybe like what Charlotte was saying with her rhubarb shrub. Maybe it's going to be a little brighter, it's going to be a little more tart, it's going to be a little stronger flavor, or do you want it to be a little bit softer? So it really depends on what's happening that season. So I know this season it's been tough for rhubarb to come up just because it's been so dry. So you might be considering that when you're making it, but it's trial and error, and start with small batches. You don't have to make it all at once and then it comes out on the other side and it's not what you want. Experiment, play around. That's really the fun part of it, is the experimentation and drinking.
I agree. Yeah, of course. So we're going to take just a quick break to welcome anybody who might be joining us late. Thanks for tuning in to Save Our Shifts episode 10. What's Shrub got to do with it? I want to thank our sponsors today, Monkey Shoulder Scotch, a pure malt blend from Speyside, great for mixing in a highball this time of year, and also a local craft gin producer, Hardshore, from here in Portland, Maine, perfect for a gin and tonic, or even with a little club soda and shrub in it, for instance. Again, our panelists today are Harper Fendler from Hunt and Alpine Club and his colleague Josh Lemay. They started Trashbird Co. and Resurgam together. We have Charlotte Stanton, the bar manager of Little Giant in Portland's West End, and Travis Gauvin from Gather in Yarmouth and the Tuscan Bistro in Freeport. So thanks for tuning in, and everyone for joining us today. We're going to transition right to my next question. There's a probably more hardcore methodology for producing shrub through fermentation. I'm curious if anybody's experimented with that. I've done some fermented beverages like tepaches and other agua frescas in the past that have essentially, when you're monitoring that process, at a certain point you go from a nice balance of sugar and acidity and drinkability into straight vinegar. And, I think that's still a great way to utilize that natural kind of open fermentation process. But I'm curious if anybody's gone to those lengths to really, dive deep into the shrub business.
I can't say that I have, strictly speaking. I won't pretend as though I'm an expert in that, but I will say, so it's really hard to make shrubs work when you're using just citrus fruits. So I was trying to mess around with that idea. I wanted something that had a little vinegar. So I was trying to essentially lacto ferment old juice, so that I wasn't wasting it. And so you can use whey, or even you can start it with some probiotic pills or whatever, but it's essentially just, citrus juice with sugar and some sort of starter of some kind. And you hang out with it for a while and it's going to ferment and it's going to get effervescent, and you're going to end up with like this dry sort of citrus soda. And if you let that go for a little longer, then you end up with this sort of vinegary, sort of not quite shrub. That then, if you mix that with other fruits, I mean, it's actually really, really nice.
So I know we have a short growing season here in Maine, a little less than 4 months, really, from mid-May through September. Anywhere outside of that, we can see a frost. So I think it's really important, especially like I'll use strawberries as an example. Right now they're in season, and it's probably going to last a week. So with the fact that growing seasons are so short in Maine, what other types of preservation techniques are you guys using at your bars besides shrub making? Charlotte, if you'd like to give me an example.
Other preservations, I'm doing cordials for sure to preserve any fruits. I mean, I do like large batches of shrubs to sort of preserve that season since it is so short. I like making the rhubarb shrub that I mentioned, and I like making a husk cherry shrub. So I just make them in like large quantities to prepare for when the more barren seasons that we can't get like the good fruits. But a cordial is a great way of doing that. And then just sort of like working with frozen fruits in a different capacity, if that's something that you can work with. Those are other ways that I try and just make the berries last,
Yes, I've never had a ton of success with like making fruit preserves. My mom makes a hell of a strawberry jam, but it's not really my thing. Obviously, like an easy one is infusions. Also, like we like to infuse fruit into spirits, kind of capture that flavor and use later on. I usually have a couple of bottles of like strawberry infused mezcal that I'll pull out in the wintertime, that I've been saving diligently all fall. And when somebody's feeling the kind of doldrums of January in Maine, we can kind of liven things up for them a little bit. But is anybody else doing any type of like pickling or canning or, even like brandying things for garnish at their bars?
So we're not doing it not directly at the bar, but just something for home. I have a dehydrator at home, and just drying some fruit, sealing it up, making sure that you still have that really concentrated flavor of things. I think that's a really fun thing to do. And there are a couple of different ways you can do it. If your oven temp can go down low enough to like 100, 150, that's a good drying method to suck the moisture out. Or if you have a dehydrator at home, great thing to do and play around with as well. And that works for all kinds of fruit. Josh and we've done that with citrus that we've used, that we've like juiced, made into citrus stock, and then dried and tried to candy before. So just trying to make stretch as much use out of one thing as we can. I love I just threw some strawberries on my dehydrator not too long ago, so those are going. So hopefully they'll dry out, maybe turn to jerky, maybe dry it a little further, maybe you can try rehydrating them. But the important thing is that you're saving that little bit of flavor.
I think it's important to, in the same way that we like to experiment with everything, that's kind of how you end up doing what we do. You make a cordial out of fruit, and then you have fruit solids perhaps that don't stay in that cordial that you strain out or whatever. Then try to freeze those or bake with them. Or I know that we had been clarifying cranberry vermouth at Hunt, and it essentially, the waste of that is a cranberry sauce. And so like a bunch of us just we're like, okay, well, put this in quart containers and I'll have this as a snack. Like it works, there's sort of no limit in the way that you can do that. As long as you're thinking like, okay, I just used citrus peels in a cordial. So now that they're sort of almost candied, what can I do? Well, I can use that as a garnish, or I can, you know what I mean? There's so many options. And I think in a place like Maine, you have to keep in mind that listen to your grandmother, everything's going to go bad and everything needs to be used, and don't ever throw anything away,
It's great to give things a second or even third life whenever possible. I know I've pulled some fruit out of some infusions in the past that I've been like, this is no good anymore. And, Damien or Ilma would be like, give me that. And then somehow miraculously make it work. I think they probably keep a blue flame on the stovetop kind of going for a while to cook off some of the alcohol. But, it's definitely a good thing when considering how to reduce waste and everything else. You had mentioned baking before, which kind of leads to my next question. So obviously we know that we can use Shrub in, mocktails or even with just some soda water, like I'm drinking it today. But also, as an alternative acid to cocktails, replacing citrus. But there are other examples for using shrubs, whether it's baking or marinades. And I'm curious to hear what you guys are using them for. Josh or, Travis, if you want to tell me a little bit about that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about Maine is how different the four seasons are and how you really have to curate a new menu, like a new sense of identity every 3.5 months. And I've only ever lived in Maine. I assume, other parts of the country are like that too. But, not even just fruit, like vegetables too. Like how else can you keep your vegetables that you want around? If you're going to make a shrub, you might as well pickle something too. So your garden vegetables, I think like pickling your onions, your green beans, your cucumbers is a fun way to also like make yourself a do-it-yourself dirty martini at home too, because you can still get the solubility from a cucumber or a green bean and make a fun martini at home. And actually with Hardshore, you wouldn't really want to use olive juice if you've experienced that. The olive and the mint don't really go great together. However, green beans and mint go a little bit better together. Gazpacho, that's another fun way to get the flavors right now at home if you want to make a cold soup on a hot day. I do like making fruit jam. I find it's quite easy. 2 parts fruit, 1 part sugar, squeeze a lemon, boil it until sugar dissolves, nice and easy. And then the last one that I do too at home if I'm hosting is I chop up herbs with a little olive oil, freeze them in an ice cube. Always a hit. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds great.
I would say shout out to a friend who knows who I'm talking about, because I am not a cook really in any especially impressive way. But I did use a lemon and thyme shrub that I had made with a friend of mine to like cure. He essentially had whitefish, and we made a ceviche, and he added a little bit more vinegar to the thing. Once again, as you can tell, this isn't my area of expertise, but with a little bit of teamwork, I had the ingredients, and it turned out pretty well. So maybe look that up in the internet. I don't know.
So Charlotte, when you're using Shrub in cocktails, like obviously it has a sweet and an acidic quality to it. So like how much is too much? Like, are you replacing it, strictly for like your sour mix build, if we're calling that like, simple syrup and lemon juice, for instance?
I would say that it doesn't really replace the citric acid. It just sort of like makes it a little bit more interesting. So I'll still add like a lemon juice or lime juice or citrus juice to the cocktail that I'm using Shrub in. It eliminates the need for so much of it that it's overwhelming and unbalanced. And with Shrubs, it's just an interesting way of adding that like little tart bite to a drink and introducing a different flavor that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that we talk so much about citrus fruit too. Sorry, Pat. And
okay.
When you use the Shrub, it's like you're immediately replacing like the acidity of the citrus fruit with the natural acidity of like apple cider vinegar or something too. Like it just adds a whole another layer of complexity that you probably weren't expecting if you've never mixed with it before.
Great. So this is a perfect opportunity, since we're talking about cocktails already, to close out with our favorite segment called What's Good Here? So this is something that Mark Hibbert started. We're going to do sort of a round table discussion. Let's pretend like I'm a basic bar customer, and I don't want to look at the menu. I want a recommendation. I'm looking for something summery, maybe with some seasonal fruit. And I'll start off with Travis by asking you, what's good here?
Hi. So I represent two different bars. So I'm going to give you two quick experiences real quick. So during the week, I'm in Freeport at Tuscan Brick. I'm in Bistro. Completely different clientele to my weekend. So at Tuscan, we use a lot of local berries in the seasonal sangria right now. So there's blackberries in that. It's got hibiscus in it. So it's really great, really effervescent, refreshing. We're a place that primarily is known for its food. So I think the cocktails definitely go well with that. We have a nice rosé Cosmo right now. So a pretty traditional cosmopolitan substituted with pomegranate instead of cranberry, and then a touch of rosé. And then in the weekend, I gather we try and be, a little bit more creative, a little bit more unique. I've got a favorite cocktail called Coyote Steals the Sun. It's an origin story about how the coyote saw that the people of the North needed a little bit more sunshine. And that is Thai chili infused rye whiskey, a little bit of lemon for acidity, apple syrup, which is actually pretty similar to the process we're talking about today. And then a touch of black walnut bitters. And I think it's very well balanced and refreshing. And it's got that late summertime vibe. And I think if you like a little bit of heat in your life, then you'll love it. So that's what's good here.
It sounds great. Next up, I'm going to ask Josh, what's good here?
So, as we are mid-COVID, I don't spend as much time at Hunt and Alpine. But if you're going there, everything is good. So ask your server or bartender because they know what they're doing. But as far as for me, in my house, I'm working on a lemon and ginger soda made out of a ginger bug. That's another technique if you want to look that up, and that would go pretty fantastic with gin or your monkey shoulder blended, whatever you might want. So yeah, just sort of drinking whatever over here.
It sounds great. Okay, Charlotte, I'm really curious what you have going on at Little Giant right now on the patio. So what's good here?
Well, I'm actually not working on the patio right now. I'm still just operating out of my house. So my girlfriend is the only one consuming all of my cocktails, and in fact need to have more people drinking them. I'm working on a strawberry basil shrub right now to complement perfectly with our short gin. A little bit of like tartness, a little lemon juice, a little agave. It's going to be delicious.
Keep it simple. Nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Last but not least, Harper, you're going to have to tell me what's good here.
So very similar boat to everyone else. I'm playing around with a lot of stuff at home right now, but it was my sister's birthday not too long ago, and I made her a big batch of marmalade for her birthday. And as I was doing it, I made a grapefruit marmalade. I thought I could add a little vinegar to some of this and, reduce the pectin a little bit and see if I could put this in a drink, or, just keep it as marmalade and mix into a drink. That's great as well. So I made a grapefruit, apple cider vinegar, and brown sugar kind of marmalade shrub. And I was playing around with that as a, riff on a penicillin. So Scotch, instead of lemon, we have that grapefruit shrub that goes in there, a little bit of ginger, and it's a pretty fun time. So
sounds delicious. Yeah. Well, I can't thank you all enough for joining us today on episode 10 of Save Our Ships Day Shifts, sponsored by Monkey Shoulder Blended Scotch and Hard Shore Gin. To everybody out there on YouTube and Facebook, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Pat McDonald. We'll see you next week.